Starship Flight 12 feels closer than ever before as both Ship 39 and Booster 19 have completed their individual pre-flight testing campaigns. But what's next? From what we can tell, assuming all went well, we expect full stack testing in the coming weeks. Caesar also took flight over Starbase and caught Ship 39 in the act mid-static fire at Massey's. And SpaceX continues progress on Pad 1's redesign and Starship's other launch facilities here in the Sunshine State, all while dropping bombshells on social media just about how Starships will be transported here via barge. From Florida Space Coast to South Texas, we have all of this coming up and more on this week's Starship Update. Kicking things off at Massey's, SpaceX has seemingly concluded pre-flight testing of Ship 39 as they rolled the vehicle back to the production site after concluding a full-duration 6-engine static fire test lasting almost a full minute in duration. Following at least one spin prime test and 2 others which we're not 100% sure about yet, SpaceX conducted a static fire of Ship 39, scheduled to fly with Booster 19 on Flight 12. Early signs of testing were noticed at Massey's in the afternoon with the chill down of the tank farm. Propellant load officially began a couple hours later and a frost line appeared on Ship 39's liquid oxygen tank. As the frost line rose above the aft tile patches on the leeward side of the ship, liquid methane load began and the frost line was visible here as well. When it comes to static fire testing their vehicles, SpaceX loads a near full tank of non-flammable liquid oxygen, which helps to weigh the vehicle down, taking some load off of the static fire stands and clamps under thrust loads. Whereas only a small amount of methane is loaded onto the vehicle, which minimizes the risk of a large-scale detonation should something go wrong in a worst-case scenario. However, even with this small amount loaded, the possibility of large explosions is still present, as we saw 9 months ago when Ship 36 experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly at Massey's before its own 6-engine static fire, taking most of the site with it. This time around, thankfully, after Ship 39 had finished prop load, the static fire seemed to go as planned with the vehicle firing all 6 of its engines for around 52 seconds. Not quite the full 60 like we're used to in the past, but it still seems like a good test. And thanks to Caesar, we caught imagery of it from the air. Soon after, detaking and safing of Ship 39 began so teams could return to Massey's. This makes Ship 39 the first to complete a static fire test campaign here since Ship 36 all the way back in June of last year. It's been a long time coming. Now, what's interesting here is that prior to Ship 36, 2 different static fire tests were conducted at Massey's, a single-engine static fire simulating an in-space relay with the sea-level Raptor, and then the full 6-engine test. But this time around, SpaceX seems to have skipped that entirely with Ship 39 as they roll it back to Mega Bay 2 without completing a single-engine test. This could mean that SpaceX is opting to not perform the in-space relay test on Flight 12, which we have seen before, and will instead simplify their list of objectives that they want to check off. This sounds pretty straightforward. But on the other hand, they could actually be targeting orbit as early as Flight 13 if all goes well here. And Raptor 3s have yet to be proven in flight. So it also makes just as much sense, in my opinion, if not more, to conduct an in-flight relay on Flight 12. We'll see. Following the 6-engine test, closures were posted to roll Ship 39 back to the production site as early as 1 day after testing. Before taking a look at what needs to be done to ship before SpaceX finally launches Flight 12, thanks to Colleen, we got some close-up photos of Ship 39 during its journey back to the production site. Looking down Ship 39's heat shield, it seems that no tiles were damaged or came off the vehicle. In the past, we've noticed some spots of missing or damaged tiles because of the intense vibrations and dynamics during ignition, but SpaceX seems to have really nailed tile attachment down along with their durability. Even more impressive now considering how much more powerful Raptor 3 is compared to Raptor 2. And Raptor 3 is only going to get more powerful as time goes on. With Ship 39 finally back in Mega Bay 2, SpaceX is taking the final steps toward Flight 12 and the first flight of Starship version 3. The first thing on SpaceX's list is to inspect everything, from the bottom of the engines all the way up to the header tank, to ensure that everything is functioning properly and no components are damaged or needing immediate repair. This includes the heat shield, of course, and even though we didn't see any damaged tiles, that doesn't necessarily mean that none are damaged. So teams will replace or reattach any tiles that might be damaged or missing. Once all checks are complete, teams will need to install the flight termination system, or more commonly known as the FTS. The FTS is a series of explosive charges that lives inside the raceway and are designed to destroy the vehicle if it becomes a risk to public safety or simply exits the flight corridor. Cross your fingers we don't see that in Flight 12. After the FTS is installed, the last thing to do before flight is to load all the Starlink simulator satellites into the payload bay. As we have seen on previous flights, SpaceX may load up to 8 of these to verify the PEZ-style deployment mechanism in space by using simulators rather than the real satellites, as the flight will not be orbital. However, we don't know if SpaceX will load these simulators on for this flight or not. Now, before we get to that though, or maybe after, I don't know, SpaceX will likely want to conduct at least one more full wet dress rehearsal of the Flight 12 stack with both Booster 19 and Ship 39. A wet dress rehearsal is a full test of the vehicle in countdown up to the point of engine ignition where the launch is aborted. So the vehicle is fully loaded with propellant, and the water deluge and detonation suppression systems on Pad 2 should also be activated. We haven't seen a wet dress rehearsal of any sort since the initial flight tests of Starship on Pad 1, but since Flight 12 is launching on a brand new pad, a new tank farm, and brand new vehicles themselves, SpaceX will likely want to verify that all systems work together before committing to a launch. Now, with all of this in mind, we may only be around 3 weeks away from Flight 12 or so, providing everything goes well from here on. Let's bring it back to Massey's for a minute. Our Starbase team was lucky enough to be in the air when Ship 39 performed its static fire test. This gave us an exclusive look and angle of all tank farm systems here literally in action. I mentioned earlier how this had been the first static fire test at Massey's since June of 2025. 10 whole months, during which SpaceX had revamped the entire methane tank farm, removing old systems and adding new ones, and protecting them against any possible ruds by installing berms and covering systems with concrete. At the static fire site itself, teams added a brand new multi-purpose structure which sits right in front of the ship's leeward side when mounted in place. We had already seen this structure during our last flyover in February and had been following it for months. Since then, it's been used during Ship 39's cryo-proof test campaign by applying lateral forces to the ship's flaps, simulating a ship catch and literally pulling on them. During this campaign though, this structure was not used for any of those purposes, but it still provides access to the payload bay area without needing lifts, which is a huge improvement from before. Since our last flight, SpaceX has also started building a brand new liquid oxygen pond to the south of the static fire site test area, likely replacing the existing one on the other side, which was still filled with oxygen and venting during our flight. Some additions and improvements here were probably already going to happen anyway, since some of the hardware was already staged in the area at the time of Ship 36's explosion, but they had a unique opportunity to start making those changes early. Teams have also since removed a series of tanks that were located to the east of the LOX tank farm. Here we can see a continuous flight augering drill installing foundation piles for a new series of tanks that are staged next to this location. Their purpose isn't entirely clear right now, but there might be two possible options. One of which is that they could just be expanding the current LOX storage system, allowing them to test more often. But another more interesting possibility is that these could replace the entirety of the liquid nitrogen storage at Massey's, which is currently made up of much smaller tanks that occupy a much larger footprint. Not exactly the most efficient use of space. By reducing the footprint of the liquid nitrogen tank farm, they could then make room for more testing sites themselves. This is especially important when you consider the pileup of test tanks that are already at the site and the many vehicles yet to come as SpaceX ramps up production for their future launch cadence goals. Now, speaking of test tanks, our latest flight gave us a good view of the 3 articles that are currently here. B-18.3, the booster forward dome test tank, is still in the large structural test stand which SpaceX nicknames the Super Crusher. It's being prepared for another round of testing following its repairs at the Star Factory a few weeks ago. This will likely include stress testing of the grid fin housings, which are located on this area of the booster. The other Crusher, the original structural test stand, is currently occupied by the S39.1 test tank, used for the ship aft section verification. While it had been tested a couple of weeks ago, this last week it remained dormant as Ship 39's engine test campaign took over testing here at Massey's. Over at the launch site, the other half of the Flight 12 equation has also seemingly completed pre-flight testing. Of course, I'm talking about Booster 19. We covered the first 2 days of testing in last week's episode, so check that out if you haven't already caught up. But testing day 3 began and ended rather quickly. This third test of Booster 19 was expected to be a 33 engine static fire after the vehicle had conducted both spin prime and igniter tests in the days prior. However, due to what seemed to be issues around the tank farm and or other ground surface equipment, SpaceX decided to scrub the test almost immediately after propellant load began. Evidently, something in the LOX or methane supply lines was not within acceptable margin. A recycle of sorts seemed within the realm of possibility as the tank farm stayed chilled for quite a while, and the test window was large enough to accommodate a reattempt. However, the booster did eventually release a depress vent, signaling that the day was done. It's important to remember that this was only the 7th time that SpaceX has loaded propellant into a vehicle at Pad 2, so there is still much to learn. Before Pad 1 supported a launch, it had conducted around 30 various tests, ranging from cryo tests to spin primes and static fires with boosters 3, 4, and 7 lest we forget, which launched on Starship Flight 1. But fear not. The following day was what we had all been waiting for, the first time all 33 Raptor engines would ignite simultaneously. Similar to the ship's static fire procedures mentioned earlier, Booster 19 was loaded up to the common dome with LOX, and then only a small amount of methane up into the main tank itself. Remember, version 3 boosters have a Falcon 9 sized transfer tube that holds methane, so there's still a lot of methane in the booster, even if we can't see a frost line yet. This is done for similar reasons as ships, to minimize the explosive risk of the vehicle during testing operations. And the explosive yield of Super Heavy, even with the minimal amount of methane on board, is massive. We do not want SpaceX's brand new launch facility to experience an event more powerful than Ship 36's. That would be a bad day for a lot of people. Thankfully, all seemed well, at least on the booster side of things as far as we could tell. All 33 engines ignited, giving us a bit of a shock as, oh my, that steam cloud went very fast and very far. And while we were all hoping to see a 10-second burn or maybe even longer, that was not to be. Only 3 to 4 seconds after ignition, the Raptors were cut off and safing operations began. Now, in thinking a bit about why this test could have been cut short, really only 2 possible explanations come to mind. Number 1, the booster's onboard computer had seen something that it didn't like and aborted automatically. Or 2, the ground service equipment encountered an issue, perhaps insufficient water pressure from the deluge or something of the sort. SpaceX posted on X that a groundside issue was the reason why the 10-engine test only lasted about 1 second around a month ago now. So it's entirely possible that they suffered the same fate here. And because of that, another test may be on the table. The short nature of the 33 engine test certainly poses that question, and considering how new Raptor 3 still is itself, that seems pretty logical once the nature of the problems here are understood and fixed. Hopefully they find out soon though. Clock's ticking. After that test was cut short, we were kind of hoping that day 5 of testing would consist of a longer duration burn. Instead, we were surprised with a wet dress rehearsal of sorts. Propellant load began on Booster 19 and the LOX frost line appeared and rose as normal. But the methane frost line appeared a bit sooner than we're used to, and it kept rising. In the end, we were treated to a completely loaded vehicle up to the dome inside of the hot staging ring. This was the first time that we had seen this over at Pad 2. Remember, during Booster 19's cryogenic testing campaign at Massey's, the tanks were loaded full 3 times, although instead of using methane, they were using liquid nitrogen there instead. It's not flammable, it's inert. The importance of this test at Pad 2 is that it further verifies that its systems, at least on the booster side, all work together well enough to hold the vehicle in a time frame that's satisfactory. Similar to Ship 39, Booster 19 was rolled back to the production site and placed back inside of Mega Bay 1, where SpaceX will complete all inspections and checkouts before moving into pre-flight preparations. Teams inside will close off the gaps and the shines that have, until now, been covered up by speed tape and will install the FTS ahead of flight. We may finally even see the aft section of the booster get painted black and have all the thermal protection system tiles installed where sensitive hardware needs to be protected from the heat generated during atmospheric reentry following its boost back burn. Hopefully, it looks just like the renders. While Caesar wasn't as lucky with Booster 19 testing while being airborne, he still got a great view of the launch site while it was still sitting at Pad 2. Booster 19's test had been aborted earlier in the day prior to our flyover, but parts of the tank farm were still frosty when we looked. Now, one thing you may notice is just how clean Pad 2 looks from the air, given how much different it looked just 1 year ago. We were used to seeing how relatively clean Pad 1 was, and Pad 2 at that point was an active construction site. Ooh, how the turntables. Since our last flight a couple of months ago, SpaceX has made a great deal of progress with revamping its design to mirror that of Pad 2 and 39A. Teams have installed sheet piles for the flame trench and service structure, as seen from this point of view. When both Pad 2's flame trench and service structure were being put together, most of the hardware here was installed as it arrived. But this will be different now at Pad 1, as most of the service structure steel has already arrived at the site and has been staged nearby. But there's more. If we quickly go over to the Sanchez lot, SpaceX is starting to stage parts for one of the flame diverter halves. Notice how this process has changed compared to what we saw with Pad 2. There, SpaceX put a large rig together where they laid down each individual pipe, then welded them all together and adjusted them all at the same time. Now what they seem to be doing here is pre-welding some of these tubes together, making sub-assemblies of the larger section before they're all put together. This likely makes it easier for final assembly, as they don't have to do this tube by tube, but together in groups. Back at the launch site, we can see the ground right behind Tower 1's base has been cleared and prepared for future construction. This is where we used to see really important hardware, such as the drawworks for the tower and other systems. Tower 1's old base design was much more vulnerable to the harsh environment of launch, while Tower 2's base was built from the start to withstand much more than that. It also looks a lot cleaner as well. While the change in appearance is a plus, the benefit of course is that everything inside as well is protected during launch. We may very well see this exact design reworked at Pad 1. Oh, and we were also able to spot the pieces for Tower 1's roof cover, which will be placed on the very top of the tower to serve as extra protection. This has already been installed on Tower 2, along with the extra cladding on the sides. Before moving on from the launch site, it's worth pointing out the massive work going on for the southern expansion here, given how much progress there has been since our last flight. Over at the production site, SpaceX has been hard at work on the vehicles for flights well past 12 and 13. Star Factory is where SpaceX produces all individual parts and tank sections for ships and boosters alike. The ship currently expected to fly on Flight 14, Ship 41, has been sitting and waiting inside a Star Factory for quite a while now, and seems almost ready to roll out to Mega Bay 2 and begin stacking, if it hasn't already by this point. We believe this is because the Pez dispenser for Ship 41 recently rolled into Mega Bay 2. Typically, the nose cone for a ship will roll out just a few days after the Pez dispenser itself, so we could just be within a couple of days from seeing that and the next ship begins stacking. Ships 42 through 45, minus 44, which still is nowhere yet to be seen, haven't seen a great deal of progress this week. Ship 45 has continued to have its TPS, or Thermal Protection System, tiles installed, while Ship 43 is having its tile pins attached. The other ship of interest this week is Ship 46. While looking in through the windows of Star Factory, we spotted a barrel section with the label. Zooming in on the label, we see that it says S-46 payload, which confirms Ship 46 as a payload ship, and shows that SpaceX might have most of the barrel sections for ships up to 46. The windows of Star Factory are our best way of tracking progress for the program as a whole, so hopefully more hardware is spotted soon, especially for HLS. Moving on from Star Factory, SpaceX has continued to make progress on Gigabay, nearing completion of the 4th level skeleton structure. Teams have also finished installing all the cladding for the walls on the 1st level, and will soon be starting on the next one. A quick reminder that once fully constructed, Gigabays both in Starbase and here in Florida will be able to support the stacking of up to 24 vehicles at one time, so it's a high priority of SpaceX to get them done sooner rather than later. However, more on Florida here in a bit. Across the road in the Sanchez lot, SpaceX continues upgrading booster transport stand number 1 to support the version 3 boosters. Currently, they only have one stand designed for version 3, and that is BTS number 3. The second transport stand is currently sitting next to booster 12, likely waiting for a spot to open up so that it can be upgraded itself. Along with the booster stands, SpaceX has been building up at least 2 new stands for ship transport as well. These seem to be coming along quite nicely and are awaiting support legs. While a lot of stuff has been happening in Starbase this week, SpaceX has been hard at work on the Space Coast this week as well. I know, it can be really difficult to keep up sometimes, trust me. In a sort of coast-to-coast rivalry, Florida's Gigabay continues to be ahead of Starbase's and is now at its full height. As it turns out, Caesar wasn't alone in flying this week. We also took to the skies here this week and had a look at all of the latest progress with Starship here on the Space Coast. Now, I know I said Florida's Gigabay is now at its full height, but that's a bit of a technicality. Some areas are now at their full height, but others aren't quite there yet. This is because teams are carefully putting together the final top sections of Gigabay. In a similar fashion to the old high bays and current mega bays at Starbase, the very topmost level of Gigabay will not be for construction, but will likely house offices, a visiting area, or other amenities. This is why the level immediately below, the one visibly having work done in these images, is the most important. That's going to be the roof of the production area here, and we can already see that in this level, for example, where the bridge cranes will be installed for the transfer aisles. Once this last production level is complete, the tower cranes themselves will likely be removed and the roof will be installed and outfitted. The crane scheduled to do that is already being staged next to Gigabay in preparation. Also noteworthy here is the cladding of Gigabay is already halfway up the building. Just like for Starbases, the cladding panels are all being prefabricated nearby and then lifted into place. Roberts Road has also changed quite a bit since we last saw it from the air. All of the modules for the launch tower at Space Launch Complex 37 were transported to the pad. The area where they were being built and staged is now receiving groundwork for what appears to be a new hangar here. It's not clear what its purpose is, but I wouldn't be surprised if this turns into some sort of Hangar X3, since the other 2 hangars here at Roberts Road are already Hangar X and Hangar X2. We also spotted hardware for the top deck of the new launch mount for Space Launch Complex 37. 2 parts were located to the south of the complex next to the rolling tent, and another part was located on the northwest next to Hangar X2. We don't quite know yet whether SpaceX will begin constructing a new launch mount in this area or if it'll be somewhere else, but we'll for sure be keeping our eyes open. We also got a look at Launch Complex 39A in this quick flyover. It still has a lot of work left, but it's starting to look like Pad 2 did just about 6 months ago. In a major sign of progress, we saw further testing of the tank farm system here at 39A. The first few tests seem to have just been running through either the methane or oxygen side of the tank farm, but in one of these latest tests, we saw both sides running in full. The more progress SpaceX makes at 39A, the more tests we'll see, and sometime soon, it'll be the water deluge system. And then a booster will arrive here, and we'll be right back to where we are now in Starbase. on the brink of the next Starship flight and the first out of Florida. The first few flights of Starship from Florida will need both boosters and ships to be transported from Starbase to Florida via barge, and until now, we only knew about Marmac 31, also known as You'll Thank Me Later. But just this Tuesday morning, at literally 3 a.m. mind you, SpaceX announced that they are retiring their Falcon drone ship, just read the instructions, and it'll be used for the Starship program. SpaceX's VP of Launch, Kiko Donchev, later confirmed on X that it'll be used to transport Starship vehicles from Starbase to the Cape. Just read the instructions is the fancy name that SpaceX uses for what used to be a transport barge called Marmac 303. The move makes sense. If you look at just read the instructions from the air, you can see how much surface area the vessel has up top to work with. With Marmac 31 being just big enough for only one booster and one ship at a time, it's totally reasonable that SpaceX would evolve it into a transport vessel for Starship vehicles. As to when this might happen, well, that'll be dictated by how successful the next Starship flights are and how quickly that they can produce Starship vehicles in Starbase. But at this point, it's going to happen one way or another. And I, for one, cannot wait to see that happen. The next couple of weeks may feel a bit more tame than this one, but it's just the calm before the storm that is Flight 12 itself, perhaps just around the corner. Do you have any estimates as to when it'll fly? Will Booster 19 return to the launch site for further testing? How do you anticipate the Flight 12 campaign to progress? Any issues on the pad? Feel free to let us know in the comments section down below. I'm Max Edmonds for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch y'all next time.